hearing, right? Okay.
Yeah.
So hopefully you're not going to have nightmares tonight after watching the film. Shall I go straight to questions, or do you want me to give a brief introduction?
Yes.
Brief introduction,
Yeah.
yeah. So hopefully it's crystal clear from watching the film that what is happening is cross-party. There's a consensus. The media are complicit because nobody knows any of this, right? It shouldn't be down to a full-time GP to explain to the public that they've lost their NHS. And that's what's happened. So the July 2022 Health and Care Act drove the final nail legally into the NHS, converting us into this managed care system. And hopefully you've got it in your heads by now. The less care provided, the more money you make. Yeah? And part of the profit model is wage suppression. Well, we all know about that.
We know about that, yeah.
Downskilling, so passing on tasks to less and less qualified people. Fragmentation and blocking access to care. Right? Now that can be done on an individual level, whereby they look at your GP records, which they've got control of now, and they'll look on that and say, pass it through their algorithm, and say, well, we consider you too high risk, you don't qualify for this operation. So that's one mechanism of denial of care. Another mechanism of denial of care is for an integrated care system, which is our label for US managed care. They can decide on a population level, 2 to 3 million people, that we will no longer provide this service for anybody on our books. For example, fertility treatments. Yeah? Or if you've got a cataract, they might only operate on one eye, not both eyes. Or if your body mass index is over a certain level, if you weigh too much, they'll say, we're not going to do your hip replacement. So they will come up with arbitrary criteria, which are not clinically evidence-based, to block care. Yeah? And a lot of this is the human factor is being eliminated because this will be done algorithmically, following flowcharts and criteria. And not only will you be ill, but you'll be up against a bureaucracy that you'll have to fight, ill-equipped, with nobody available to guide you as to how to navigate this maze that has been set up to block your treatment. So that's where we are. I suppose your biggest problem at the moment is accessing GP services. Yeah? I'll give you an appointment, but in 3 months' time. Unfortunately, the way this scam has worked is the use of sticks and carrots and conditioning and going by stealth, right? So the way they've set up general practice is to reward certain types of behaviour and not to reward other behaviour. So a key element of general practice is continuity of care, knowing your patient, right? It's very efficient. It in fact reduces your chances of dying, believe it or not. It provides job satisfaction for your GP, and you learn. You learn experientially together through your patient journey. Now what we have is fragmented care, where you don't see the same doctor twice. You might not even see a doctor. You'll be seeing people who aren't necessarily the best people to see because they don't have that same training. So you have a bigger clinical blind spot. A blind spot means you're unaware of what you don't know. Yeah? Whereas the GPs had 5 years in medical school, another 5 years, then they're allowed out to be a GP on their own. So hopefully their blind spot is a lot smaller. But as you downskill, as you replace doctors with non-doctors, you're increasing the blind spot and you're increasing the risk to the patient. And nobody really wants to work in that situation. And what they want high turnover of staff. They don't want anybody with experience or organisational memory. Yeah? A bit like teachers. How long do teachers stay in their jobs? 3 or 4 years, they're burnt out and they're off. Then they get a new recruit of students saddled with debt to come and service their debt, working under horrendous conditions. It's exploitation. But they started with the miners, right? when we thought, what's this Arthur Scargill talking about? That was the beginning of the neoliberal assault on the welfare state, and it's got to a point where we've lost our NHS, right? And our discussion should be renationalisation. But no politician in this country is saying renationalisation. So yeah, access to GPs is very difficult, but GPs, through this carrot and stick approach, have actually been, to a great extent, the architects of their own demise, because they've gone for short-term carrot every time. And a couple of those carrots have been not to see patients face-to-face, giving incentives for email access, giving incentives for telemedicine, giving incentives not to employ other doctors. And I'll finish on this point. There's an incentive scheme brought out in 2019. In 2019, there was the biggest contract change of general practice that there had been since 1948. It went through on the nod without a vote of GPs. GPs have got zero knowledge of what that new contract entailed. But one of the elements of that contract was a scheme called the Additional Role Reimbursement Scheme. Now, if you say that literally, that's arse, right? even their acronyms are taking the piss. And what it means is there is a couple of £1 billion, but you cannot employ a doctor. You must employ non-doctors. And if you don't take part in that scheme, you don't get the money. That's just one example of how they've been incentivized to destroy their own profession. So I'll leave it there. Over to you guys. Any questions? Do you want to say anything before the question?
No, just to actually reiterate what you were saying. As you know, I said earlier, the RCN managed to get the reject vote out, and we are campaigning to continue to work with us, and it is all through grassroots organisation, spreading the word as much as possible. So yeah.
Well, I think in some ways that your film, sadly, is overly optimistic, because you use the phrase "they," which looks like a political they, but this is the cultural logic of late capitalism. So you've got, and what's really worrying is land grab and asset stripping. So you've got a burnt out NHS, you've got burning a hole in it, and there is a profit being made, and of course the scarcity side with wages, skill, etc., is one thing, and also then that knock-on effect on patient care. But and then you've got this kind of desperate attempt to salvage anything profit-wise for the profit makers. But it seems to me that there is a huge tension here coming, not only with obviously the NHS sector, but the health and social care sector with an ageing population. So I would think we were beyond tipping point. What I wanted to come back to, however, is David Graeber's point, which is where do you mobilise? Where, say, locally, would we mobilise to have a win? Because if you took his, obviously, he's thinking, I think, of the Occupy movement in the States, when he talks about a local win. But where would we think we should be mobilising to have a win that would be significant? Obviously, struggle around wages is absolutely vitally important, and supporting workers on picket lines. But I just wonder about that question about where our win would be.
Okay. Any other question before we? Yeah.
It kind of connects to what you said actually, but the reason I came here tonight very specifically has actually been reflected back to me by everybody I've spoken to around here, and that is we're all looking to find what do we do. I think certainly everybody who's come here tonight already knows that we're losing all our public services catastrophically. So any advice in the realms of what do we do would be very welcome.
So Colin's also on the panel. Colin I've met through campaigning and activism. He's part of the COSH campaign, which is Save the St Helier Hospital campaign in southwest London. You want to start?
And your PA as well.
And my organiser, yeah. You want to start on the what can we do, and is it too late? I've never been accused of being overly optimistic. Thank you for that.
I think definitely support the strikes. But I think what I said at the last screening was it's the message that you see in the film is the purest message you can be given. So if you then take that out to the general public or through your campaign groups or any organisations, if they start sort of saying we can't campaign on that issue but maybe that one, straight away you're being restricted. That is the message. Renationalisation is the message. So if nothing else, if you share the film as far as possible and hopefully have some future screenings, then people will get the purest message and hopefully enough people will act and do what's right. But renationalisation is the main aim, is because it's gone so far now that you have to call for it. Nothing else will be good enough, because it's got so far down the line that nationalisation is the only saviour. But, I know that's a bit of a vague answer, but
in terms of the policy makers and the policy drivers, Oliver Letwin, who's the mastermind of a lot of what's gone on, he was formerly of N.M. Rothschild's bank privatisation unit. He, with John Redwood, wrote the pamphlet in 1988 called Britain's Biggest Enterprise, where they spelt out how they would transition from an NHS to American-style healthcare. He said within 5 years of a Tory government, the job would be done. Now that would have taken us to 2015. The job hasn't been done because there have been a lot of successful local campaigns. I'll name you one, the Lewisham A&E campaign, which is where I got involved and started to learn about what was going on. They planned to shut down another A&E department with its ITU, with its maternity unit, after the local hospital featured in that film, Queen Mary's Hospital, turned into luxury retirement flats, had already been closed. This was insane. And there was a massive mobilisation, and those plans got scrapped. And there are campaigns across the country where there have been, if not complete victories, stays of execution. And those battles have helped inform a wider public. But it's hard to mobilise the public in a fight that they don't know needs to be happening. That is our biggest obstacle. And that is why people in power and people in the media are actually very frightened, and they're doubling down on the censorship. So if you speak out about COVID, for example, if you speak out about the lockdowns, they deplatform you and they smear you as a conspiracy theorist. Right? And they continue to indoctrinate and brainwash everybody else. So there is this herd mentality. As soon as a point of view is demonized, people stop listening. So we need to, as individuals, rediscover our critical thinking, understand that the whole point of corporate media is to control us and to brainwash us. But in order to swallow that message, you need some personal experience. Yeah? You need personal experience to see how corrupt it is. And I'll give you my personal experience. Was in 2013, I went on a big demo in Manchester, one of the biggest demonstrations in Manchester's history. 50,000 plus people there on an NHS demo. Happened to be Tory party conference with the world's media there. And I was so excited, I thought, oh my God, this is going to be all over the news. Can't wait to get home. I ring my wife and said, don't go to sleep. Stay up. It's going to be game over.
we marched right past the conference centre.
We marched past the conference centre. We could see the cameras. All they had to do was turn them on us. Yeah? I came back and there was nothing on the news. And you think, oh my God. Yeah? Then you realise what a charade we're living in. It's a total fabrication. And the biggest way of controlling is censorship by omission.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
This part of the puzzle nobody sees, we just see that bit. Right? But we have to have hope, because without hope we're lost. And without the fight, the future ahead of us is they're going to double down on immigration. They're going to keep banging on about illegal migrants and traffickers and whatever. They're going to ratchet up interracial hatred, intergenerational hatred. They're also using other cultural dividing lines to get us all squabbling and fighting each other. And it wouldn't surprise me if in part of their blueprint is to have race riots. So whilst we are destroying each other, they carry on their pilfering and wealth transfer. So, you know, however hopeless it might seem, I'm going to carry on doing what I need to do. But our biggest battle is spreading the word. So, you know, all of you have power. You can all at least inform your families. You can at least inform your friendship circle. You may even want to talk to some work colleagues. You might even dare pick up the phone and ring LBC or Talk Radio, who are constantly brainwashing us to dismantle the NHS. We can't afford it. People are living too long. Look at the health tourists. Aren't the nurses greedy? Nobody's challenging that narrative because there's not enough of us confident enough to ring up and say, you're talking nonsense and you're paid to talk nonsense. And by the way, you carry all the adverts for these private insurers and you carry the adverts for Boots. Boots who don't pay any tax in this country. Boots who escape billions of pounds in tax that should be paying for public services. Now if you get on there, I can get on there, I can do a morning surgery, ring up LBC, but I don't hear anybody else doing it, right? There's only one of me, right? I know I'm superhuman, but come on, give me a break. We can all do this. We can all do this.
Just getting back to what that man said, you know the Occupy movement you mentioned? That actually was global and it was all over the UK, and I was involved in the one at London as well. But in terms of a victory, do you remember the TTIP trade deals? A few years ago it was North America and Europe. That looked like it was a given, it was going to go through, and there was mass protests across Europe, particularly in Germany, but also here, and that was slightly shelved. But for a long time it looked unstoppable, so protest does have an impact as long as enough people get to hear about it.
In terms of independent media getting the message out, can you tell us, is there any way to, for example, promote your film, specific alternate media that we could promote, donate to? I mean, declassified UK is a really good thing about foreign policy, but it's not so much about domestic policy. But and then I did have another quick question, which is that a lot of people who would really strongly agree with everyone in this room is going to work their asses off to get a Labour Party in government, who, as you say, they're going to be behind privatisation as well. So how can we, when they're in power, you know, raise awareness about what they will do in power as well?
Yeah, so people to look out for in alternative media. Jimmy Dore is very good.
Oh yeah.
The Grey Zone. Max Blumenthal. UK column I don't know that much about. Yeah. So there are other good people out there. They're all doing their. Russell Brand actually, who's had me on a couple of times. He's quite open about things. He has a massive following.
He's been a bit throwing right wing Fox News recently.
I think he's not so much
It's a debate.
Yeah,
he's been like sort of bashing the COVID vaccine a lot recently and promoting.
That's a different debate, and we can maybe talk about it when you buy me a drink later. But if we're going to win this, we're not going to win this with just us lefties.
That's true.
Right?
True.
The whole point of the film was not to appeal to people's humanity, not to appeal to their love of their fellow man, but to appeal to their self-interest. Yeah? Informed self-interest, because the targets of this aren't the poor. They're going to be allowed to die, right? They're not the targets. The targets of this are the middle class. And there was an article in the Sunday Times about a King's Counsel who developed a cancer, who was paying Bupa a premium of £6,000 at the beginning, and by the end of 8 years he was paying £160,000 premium. Because every year they're ratcheting up his premium to price him out of insurance. Yeah? And then he realised, hang on, this insurance isn't as good as I thought it was going to be. Right? We need these people with connections to realise there's an enlightened self-interest to have universal healthcare that is top quality, right? And we mustn't dismiss people. So the right wing have been far more on the loss of our civil liberties over COVID than the left wing has, right? And I had a discussion in a left wing group run by Crispin Flintoff, not the Andrew Marr show, quite early on during COVID. And when we found out that the vaccine did not prevent transmission, do we all accept now that the vaccine doesn't prevent transmission? Yeah?
I did then. Yes.
Right. And Pfizer knew from the beginning. They never told us. Yet they were making the argument that in order to protect Granny, you had to get vaccinated. So they were vaccinating people at next to zero risk. Yeah? And the point I made on that show was, we mustn't disregard informed consent and patient autonomy. But so many on the left were quite happy to throw that out of the window. Basic principles, and just blindly follow a government that suddenly is concerned with our health, that is dismantling our health service. These don't add up. Yeah? So the whole pandemic I saw through a different lens, and I could see when they told GPs to shut their doors at the beginning of the pandemic, none of this adds up. On what planet does it make sense to shut down access to healthcare in a pandemic? No. Do you want to say anything?
No, I just completely agree with you in regards to that. And I think that in regards to just like seizing the narrative, you know, I'm a member of Nurses United, and we use a lot of opportunity to get to talk TV and the audience who wouldn't normally get to. So I think it's really, really important having those conversations. And in regards to, you know, supporting the nurses, because it's going to be a really tough time, especially as the RCN has rejected, we're already being sold as the greedy nurses, etc., all those kind of things. So it's really important to just, all of us seize that narrative. Just for example, they're saying about, you know, pay rises, about pay restoration, all of that. So it's just getting everyone to speak and reclaim all of the narrative, definitely.
Yeah, first of all, I want to say thank you for making the film and all your presentations on Dr. Andrew Marr show. I was actually part of the Lewisham campaign. I used to live in London, like many of us. And what occurs to me, I mean, it was amazing. You know, we had 25,000 out, and of course, Millwall Football Club was just brilliant, and they would go on the pitch wearing, say, the Lewisham Hospital. So that was a fantastic way of doing that, of course. And as you say, it's directly the result of what happened in that neighbouring trust. And then things were still enforced and lost. Some of the land got lost, I think, from Lewisham Hospital, where they weren't able, as you say, to close the accident emergency at that time. I think, I mean, this is what you think about, you know, as a cause for optimism, and I'm like you, I'm not often optimistic. When you see things all put together like this, even when you think you know it all, it's very, very shocking. But despite all the efforts, the majority of people in this country don't want the private sector in the health service. They don't even want even Tory voters don't want the private sector running railways, the utilities, the water, etc., etc. So the issue is, and I don't expect you to have the answer, is how we get those messages out. But I totally agree with you that we've got to get beyond our bubble. We really have to get beyond our bubble. And I was going to say something else, but I won't waste your but yeah, that's the other thing to say, like something like a hospital campaign. It's very, very clear if they're going to try and close hospitals, everyone gets angry about their, like, particularly A&E, and the people who are working out how long it would take you in the London traffic to get to the, and it could be an hour for an ambulance rather than sort of 15 minutes and things like that. But sorry, I'm not very well, I keep forgetting what I was going to say. Yes, but actually people don't see so much with GPs. They've seen a bit, obviously now, when you, I mean, I've lived here 7 years, I haven't seen a GP once. Thankfully I'm very healthy, so I haven't wanted to. But every time I have needed to, I've only seen a practice doing telephone, etc., etc. And for some people, looking at the other end, it's been very, very serious. So how do people, it is this bit by bit thing. How do we take it that people don't want privatisation, they don't want an American system, and understand that we're well on the way? But the fact that it's taken us so much longer is because people don't want it. And I think that actually, probably, we have lost it, and I think we'll have to reinvent it.
Yeah.
That's quite a few questions.
You wanna go?
I forgot what I was going to say now.
It's infectious, sorry.
Now, what I would say, just add before Bob actually does a better answer than I think when you have these groups like the dentistry as well as another issue, GPs, hospitals, I think as long as those groups obviously talk about their local issue, which is obviously very important to the local people, but once people are involved, and that's a good way for them to, the first step, to say that this is a national situation and it's linked with everything else and it's a much bigger picture. I think it's very important because a lot of campaign groups just cater for their particular situation and don't encourage people to look further or to realise it's all linked up. So if you act locally but think nationally, which is the phrase, I think that way you've got better chance of understanding the bigger picture, and then those groups can then connect together in the future, I think.
I think the problem with the GP access issue is the GPs don't know why there's an access problem. Yeah? Because they're so focused on what's coming down from the top. They've lost sight of the day job. So I have opted out of a lot of this managerialism. I've taken a significant hit in income, but my work is all right. I'm a small practice. Half of my patients I see the same day. They've run up in the morning, I see them the same day. I do not have an access problem because I haven't fallen into all these traps that people have set. Yeah? So in order for them to realise they've made a lot of mistakes, they're going to have a lot of reflection, and that's painful for people, right? And they're so far down the road, they can't see a solution. Yeah? So they're blind, or they're willfully blind, or it's more comforting to be blind, as to how they've destroyed their own careers. The problem with GP leadership is they're people of my age and upwards who've done reasonably well out of working in public service, because it's really got tight in the last 5 years or so, right? But up until then, it wasn't too bad, right? In order for a lot of the transition to occur, GPs have had to vacate the moral high ground and start exploiting other doctors, right? So you have a GP principal partner who can employ salary GPs on maybe 80% of what he pays himself. If you do that 5 times, you can sit on your ass and have the same income. We cannot say to Virgin or Richard Branson, hang on a minute, that's not right. You're not a doctor, you don't see patients. But a lot of these GPs who sowed the destruction for the next generation are guilty. So they're not going to look back and say, oh, well, this was a big mistake. And when did that rot set in? In 2004, under New Labour, where they dismantled the Beveridge contract with GPs, the Bevan contract with GPs. So now you could exploit your colleagues, right? And did GPs have their up in arms? No, they said, all right, that sounds like a good number. And the GP negotiator, who said it was a good idea to privatise out of hours general practice, had set up a private company to run out of hours. So we, as an organisation, the BMA, cannot look to government or a political party and say you're corrupt, you're not representing the interests of your members, because that's exactly what the BMA leadership did. And they sabotaged their own industrial action in 2016. Thankfully, there's different leadership within the junior doctors at the moment, and they're quite strong and politicised, because they've decided either we fight now or we're leaving. That's the position. So they've got actually nothing to lose, and they're quite radical, and good luck to them. But the history has been poor. How do patients rationalise that? If they can't see their GP and they're suffering, you're not going to be very sympathetic to the plight of GPs. That's just human nature. But if you want to do something, join a patient participation group within your practice and start asking your GPs, how have you let your service get so bad? They might say, look, we've tried really hard, we can't recruit. Now that's the problem. Yeah? But if you find out that the lead GP only works half a day a week while he's sitting back exploiting others, then you need to say, well, hang on, your income, why aren't you seeing anybody? And there's quite a few GPs in that position. I know a few of them, right? So they need to walk the walk, not just talk the talk, yeah? It's difficult to hold on to young doctors because they haven't grown up with the goodwill that I think we maybe experienced. You're younger than me, but I experienced. When I qualified, I had no debt. I lived on site, rent-free. My laundry was done and I got a clean white coat at the end of the week. And there was respect for the profession. And that builds a lot of goodwill, yeah? That's all gone. They come out with £100,000 worth of debt. They're treated like dirt. There's no food available out of hours. You've got to pay market rents. You've got to travel into work. You've got to pay for parking, and you're treated like dirt. Now, what person in their right mind is going to be loyal to a system? They don't want to hear me talking about how great the NHS is. The NHS to them is an abuser. Yeah, they're like battered wives living with an alcoholic. And I'm telling them that alcoholic's a great bloke. Just need to give him a chance. They do not have the experience that I have. And I can look back. In 2007, when I watched Sicko by Michael Moore, and if you watch another film, please watch Sicko, which we had a clip of in there. I was ignorant, I didn't know what had been happening from Thatcher onwards, and I thought, thank God, we don't have an American system. What little did I know, yeah? My brother said maybe we should go to America, it's better or whatever. I went and did an elective in America in 1991, 92, and no doubt the doctors were making a lot of money, but if you walk around any public vicinity downtown, you can see a lot of disabled people pushing trolleys, carrying their whole life's belongings with them. And their only mistake was to be ill. And then the life spirals out of control. And I thought, I can't work in a system like this. So yeah, it's difficult to crack that nut, but there would be a sea change if we had clean leaders. Look at the Labour Party, for God's sake, that's a prime example, right? If the top is rotten, the bottom is very compliant and doesn't want to rock the boat, yeah, and becomes very trapped. Yeah, so we need a new leader of a genuine political party, don't we? At the back,
yeah, thank you for your film. It's a great weapon against the lies that people are now believing. It's how you change people's hearts and minds though is the problem. I spent 25 years as a nurse at the NHS, so I've seen the dismantling of it. And how do you do that when you can maybe change in conversation people's opinions, but there's no political party for them to use their vote that would protect the NHS, and you've got this weasel of a leader that of a socialist. No socialism left in when you're expelling people for being socialists. You know, it's pathetic. And my name's John Wills. If this goes Labour Party, I'm looking for a way out. But so that's the difficult thing, really. I think this is possibly where the trade unions come into play a bit more, because we're in a corner here, really. The control of the media means that people's minds are controlled. So even colleagues in nursing, there's no fight there for some of them. They've been worn down. They're just doing their shift, getting their job done, and not really got this kind of mindset where's the challenge? Where do we fight? This ruining of this jewel of our country.
A colleague of Bob of mine, someone called Mary Lee, she sort of says, tell people never mind getting behind a party, get behind a cause. And I think that no matter who's in government, no matter who's your local council or your local MP, every one of them has to be pressured. So the message becomes more important about, rather than who's in power, because whoever's in power will play like a good cop, bad cop, and will kind of continue with these policies. So if they get enough pressure from right across the board, their positions will have to change. They'll have to represent us. And when that happens, who knows? But I think if we can't keep waiting for the next election or the next councillor to come in and hopefully they will listen. We have to start right now, whoever they are and whatever party they are.
Yeah, I think we can't wait for people to become leaders and sit back until that happens. You've got to be an active citizen. Certainly I think the unions are maybe the best focus of activity, but if the members aren't aware of anything, the unions can tell them whatever flannel. Look at the GMB asking their members to accept 5%. So a union has told their own members that they're going to be 15% worse off than they were 10 years ago, rather than 20% worse off. The other thing about explaining things, even though inflation comes down, unless inflation goes negative, your money isn't going to buy the same as it did before the inflation went up. People don't get it because we are kept illiterate because none of this is explained. But union members and people at a lower level, if they're not just careerists wanting to climb the greasy pole, they need to get informed and they need to ask serious questions of their leadership. Yeah. So I was in Birmingham last week at a Unite community, and I was very critical of all the unions, and I thought, I'm not going to get a good taste in the mouth at the end of this. But 2 or 3 of them said, can you come and speak to our union groups? Yeah. Now I shouldn't be having to educate union members. They've got millions in the bank, right? We need a couple of clean union leaders to say, oh, we're going to invest in educating our members. We can take adverts out in the paper, we can make social media campaigns. There's a lot of resource there that is untapped. What are they doing? What are they doing? Yeah. So as I said to you, I don't know what I did say, February 21, the unions rubber stamped the white paper that went through the following year. Became an act. The RCN, the GMB, the Royal Colleges and the BMA said, fine, we're happy with integrated care. These are the same people now defending workers' rights. The Act actually gets rid of national bargaining, makes it legal to discharge elderly people back home without an assessment, called discharge to assess. If you watch Sicko, they've got patient dumping. So they have to, by law, treat you in an emergency. As soon as the emergency is over, they dump you or drop you off at the local homeless centre, right? That's become legal in this country now. But, you know, people like me have to go around telling everybody about it, and the health unions are mute. So that is where we need to push. If you're a member of any of these organisations, now you're so well informed, you need to say, what are you guys up to? What are we paying you for? The problem with humans is, as you get to a certain comfort level, you forgot what you came in to fight. Yeah? There are very few people who keep it real as they're climbing, right? Corbyn was one of those. Trouble is, he was surrounded by snakes.
Yeah. And I'll reiterate that with the Royal College of Nursing, obviously it has the Royal Professional side and the trade union. As you know, it's only recently that it's become able to strike an active trade union. It's a constant battle, for me in my branch and across the branches. However, the fact that we did reject was all to do with, we had NHS workers say no, we had Zoom calls every week, we went legal team, we went campaigning all across the unions, despite the fact that Pat Cullen had told us you can have 5% above inflation. So there I was on Talk TV saying we want pay restoration, we want above inflation. Then she was like, oh, I'll meet halfway. And then she was like, 5%. So never get Pat Cullen to sell your house for you, basically. But the fact that we managed to reject it is fantastic. But the battle's not over, as you know. GMB have accepted it, Unison have accepted it, and all of the a lot of minor health unions have accepted it, so it is a constant battle. The Royal College of Nursing have got their Congress In May, we're going to try and lobby to join the TDC, whether that happens or not, but it's a constant battle. And I so agree with political education, because I went along to the RCM branch meeting 2 weeks ago, and there was nothing about the fact that we were picketing. In fact, the chair said, now, anything else that's happened in the year? I said, oh, you're on the picket line fighting for fair pay. You know, the fact that that's an aside. But the trade unions it is a possibility to change, and I really believe that. I heard today that there's going to be joint action with the NEU. Obviously, with the BMA, they've been fantastic. They've changed. They've got all of their activists are very trained by people in America who can, you know, like I said to you, you know, change the narrative around. And having people speaking on GMB News, wherever, getting activists speaking and changing the narrative is just so important. It's so key, because constantly we are faced with the toxic right-wing media, and we really need to fight it, and particularly in this town, with the fact that, you know, we are a coastal town and the rhetoric against small boats, and we're very active pro-refugee and all of that. It's really doubly important, because as you were saying about the GPs, we really struggle to recruit and retain GPs in this area. It's not a particularly nice area sometimes for people to come. And so the people are going to be saying, oh, it's because of the small boats, or the refugees, that. So we've got to counter that narrative. It's really key and really important. And this is why the RCN needs to be lobbying, and I'm very ashamed that, you know, we rubber stamp that, but we need that political education. We need to get Dr Bob Gill to the RCN, but they refused to let you come along, didn't they? They kind of dropped you.
I was invited to do a Zoom meeting for the RCN. I thought, this is good. I can tell them where they're going wrong. And they did a pre-interview, and then that meeting never happened.
Because it would be wonderful for you to come to Congress, but we
Yeah,
can
well,
just dream.
you can
Maybe a
be in
fringe
there.
event, yeah.
But with the BMA, the junior doctors got very organised. They put a slate together. I forget what they called it, doctors vote. And they screened people. They interviewed people, saying, if you're going to be on our slate, we want to know what you think about this, that, and the other. They were very thorough and organised. And this group of politicised doctors has taken over the junior doctor committee. If it was left to the old guard, they'd be sold out. Yeah. So first you have to know there's a problem with your leaders before you can challenge your leaders. At the moment, they don't know there's a problem with the leaders, and that's where you come in. Maybe in front.
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, that film was just fascinating and really educational for me, because I saw it first time in Eastbourne a few months ago. I met Colin as well, and you know, it blew me away with what's going on in the NHS, and in fact I didn't know, and where over the years you've had, you know, medical insurance companies approach you, and they still are, you know, knocking on your door. You know, people are not aware, you know, I'm guilty of it, you know, working in different companies where they've offered medical insurance. And then, of course, once you see this film, well, then it opens your eyes to realising what exactly is happening to the NHS. And I was born in Lewisham Hospital quite a few years ago. And since seeing your film in Eastbourne, and now I'm back here again as well, and last night I saw the film, I think it's by the same documentary it was the What's Wrong with Labour? The Big Lie. Yeah, The Big Lie.
Oh, yeah.
I saw that last night. And so now I'm sort of spreading the word and doing whatever I can, and actually going down the rabbit hole and looking and seeing what else is going on. To then find out all about, I'm educating myself on the ICBs, to find that the South East London ICB, of course, it covers quite a large area. You know, there's about 5 different areas: Southwark, Lambeth, I think Bexley Heath, and forgive me, you probably know which area.
Woolwich or Bromley.
That's right, which is where all my family, the whole of my family, for 3 generations are living in Bromley and that area. And so King's College Hospital is key. So then I actually phoned King's College Hospital, spoke to the media department to find out that they're advertising the fact that King's College Hospital has opened a branch, King's College, not only in Dubai, but also now in Saudi. So they're encouraging doctors that will be trained in the UK. I mean, I've seen it, I've looked at the websites, and I've looked at the American companies that are associated with building you know, King's College in Saudi Arabia, and the fact that they're encouraging doctors to be trained in the UK and then to go across to work in these hospitals that are associated with the ICB of South East London and King's College. So how can we challenge this? You know, now I found out about it. I'm telling everybody, but who?
So I did a bit of direct action. You might know of the Dr Chris Day case, who was a whistleblower.
Yes.
He made the national press. He's been fighting for 8 years. This has cost the taxpayer over £1 million just stopping his case from being heard. He worked in ITU, where they weren't supervised. They were coming from very junior doctors to being on ITU, intensive care units, without training. And what he saw transpire was a young doctor who'd never done a chest drain before, poking a chest drain into somebody's liver who then died, bled to death, unsupervised. Yeah? His crime was that he reported on one day 2 junior doctors didn't turn up, locums didn't turn up. So he was the only doctor. He was covering the intensive care unit and the whole of the hospital, Queen Elizabeth in Woolwich. One doctor, overnight. So he ran the managers and said, you need to get the consultants in, you need to do some emergency measures, this is not safe. And he documented it all. Now by doing that, he's made a name for himself. He said, don't write any emails, we'll sort it all out, don't write anything down, right? Then later on it came to an appraisal, and this is an annual thing, a way to keep doctors in check, right? If you rock the boat, they can use that, they can weaponize it against you, as they weaponize the GMC against doctors, yeah? So he went to the appraisal, and they said, you're fine, you're doing very well. He got up to leave, and he said, I've just got to tell you about my hospital, which is very unsafe. And their jaws dropped. There was a panel of 3 doctors. He went to leave. Before he left the building, they said, don't let him leave the building. They kept him waiting there 2 hours, called him back up and said, you're not fit to practice. We're withdrawing your training number. And then started an 8-year legal battle, which is still ongoing. The direction I did was, after hearing the latest tribunal, what had unfolded, where the trust had deleted 90,000 emails, failed to disclose it to the tribunal, totally deleted the account of the main manager who was dealing with the case. The head of communications, who put out defamatory statements, pulled a sickie, didn't turn up in court. You couldn't make up the amount of corruption and dysfunction that took place in that tribunal. The direct action, I went to the board meeting and I challenged them. And the guy, Ben, I forget, huh? I got my daughter to film it, right? And there was a chief exec, Ben Travis, who was going on about how patient safety is improving and how we've done well, painting a complete fairy story. Then it came to the public contributions and I read out a statement. And he didn't know where to look. It was all recorded. And the chairman was trying to interrupt me. I didn't let him interrupt me. I finished what I had to do. And then we used that video on social media and LinkedIn. LinkedIn is where all the NHS managers are,
Yeah.
right? And it had a significant impact, such that the chairman wrote to me, but he wrote to me in a way to say, can I validate my claims I made about my patients being damaged by that trust? Yeah? So he was setting me a trap to see whether I could, evidence my claims. I didn't reply to it. But this is a threatening technique to silence people. The point of that story was, we can all do these sort of things, yeah? But we have to step out of the British comfort zone. You've got to be a bit more French.
Yeah.
And if you do anything, bloody record it, so more people can see it.
Yeah.
But I was asked to, the media department of King's College said, please write in and I will send this to the board.
Yeah.
So,
Waste of time.
It's
Waste of
waste of
time.
time.
You need to, if you're really motivated, get a group of people and go on to a die-in or whatever, spill some red paint, make a scene, call the press first before you do anything, and say this is why we're doing it. That's the only way to get attention.
But I mean, I don't know the numbers, I'm sorry, I don't know the numbers of how many doctors and nurses that we've lost since Brexit, of course. And then now to see King's College Hospital out there in the public domain advertising for our doctors and nurses that are being trained in the NHS to then go across to Saudi Arabia, to the United Arab Emirates, and to work in hospitals tax-free.
Yeah.
Because that's how they're attracting them, when we need doctors and nurses in the UK.
Can you email that advert to me, please? Sounds quite interesting.
Yeah, I'll try.
Quite attractive, I might take.
But what is the percentage of the amount of doctors that are actually now, every time you go to a hospital, a consultant, you're finding that in fact he's not in this week or next week because he's in Saudi or in Dubai doing private operations. So what is the percentage that doctors actually have to work in the NHS and work there and operate? Because it seems to be very small compared.
I think it's quite arbitrary at a consultant level. Depends if you're on board with what's going on. You can spend all your time never seeing patients. You can just be purely managerial. You can be purely a salesman for all that's going on.
Really?
But yeah, it's very different. The junior doctors are contractually obliged. They're the workhorses of the NHS. It's only after a certain level you can be offered these sort of schemes. Once you've got your certificate of completion of training.
So, oh, right.
Any other?
You want to speak?
Your friend at the back.
That lady first, we'll come back to you.
And of course the NHS is hugely reliant on international medical graduates, doctors who are called specialists and associate specialists, staff and associate specialist grade doctors, and they're not in, they're disadvantaged compared with consultants and others. And they, like the junior doctors, they're the backbone of the NHS. And I know because I praise a lot of them, and the NHS would collapse without them. But my question was, how do you two keep it real? Because you've stuck to your principles, you've refused to be blinded by what's been going on. Was there a pivotal moment for each of you, Antonia and Bob, that turned you into activists?
I guess because as nurses we aren't like natural advocate for patients, so often we've been trained to be the voice of the voiceless and just speak out for people. But also I guess it boils down to, like you said, your individual family. The fact that my daughter had a life-threatening blood condition and she had to have treatment that would have been in America would be unaffordable. It's something I'm absolutely passionate about, but it is, if there's anything, the current Labour Party are talking us about patriotism, but if there's anything we can be proud of in this country, that is the bloody NHS. It's the epitome of everything that's good about us, from cradle to grave, the radical kindness, no matter who you are, where you're born, what you earn, you never have to worry, you get, regardless, day or night, and that is something truly, truly beautiful, and, if there's anything worth fighting for, that is it.
Yes, so my story was facing obstruction at a local level, and I spoke to other colleagues to see how they felt. Was it just me that think the service is going downhill? I spoke to other colleagues, and in a clinical commissioning group meetings where groups of GPs get together, I described our local group as being like North Korea, where we go, we hear some nonsense, and we all clap when we're supposed to, right? So this got back to the chair of the clinical commissioning group, who was Howard Stout MP, who was exposed in the cash for, what was it, one of the parliamentary expenses scandals. He was an MP for Dartford, then he retired from Parliament and he was a GP as well. He was the chair of our local clinical commissioning group, and he rang me up. And he said, I hear you're not very happy. I said, yeah, I'm not very happy. He said, what's the problem? I said, look, patients are getting worse care. They sometimes go into hospital, come out worse than when I sent them in. And I laid out a few examples. He said, look, you're just too sensitive. I said, all right. Then his next rationale was, I'm not hearing this from anybody else. Your patient group is just unlucky. Right? Now, if that wasn't enough, his final comment finished me off. He said, why are you worrying? You're not paying for it. Now, that is the leader of our clinical commissioning group. And at that point, I had a word with my wife. I said, look, I've had enough of keeping quiet and keeping my head down. I've got to do something. I've got to get involved. I've got to try and do something, because our leaders, they're selected to be like that. Yeah. So that was and that demo in 2013 in Manchester. Those two things, I thought, we're kept in the dark, and look at the leaders we've got. It's very corrupt. If you've got anybody in NHS leadership in a trust or the GP groups, either they're really stupid and gullible, and they believe all the management spin, or they're complicit, right? There cannot be any other excuse, yeah? And the more I tried to work out how corrupt my local clinical commissioning group was, the worse it was. I stood to be chair of our clinical commissioning group. I had zero chance of getting elected, but I wanted to use the Hastings as an educational opportunity. On a good day, I might have got one vote, and that's my own. Right? I live in Sidcup, which is one of the safest Tory boroughs in the country, right? There was a screening interview to get onto a ballot. They engineered one candidate elections. It is totally rigged, right? And another example of the corruption was they were trying to dismantle our local diabetes services. They got rid of the guy who was providing good clinical leadership, and they wanted to outsource it. That was the case. And what I found out was that they had gone to the 3 different interested parties separately and told them a different set of lies. They told the diabetes consultants that the GPs and the patients want to tender it out. They went to the patient group and said the GPs and the consultants want to tender it out. And they went to the GPs and said the consultants and the patients want to tender it out. Right? So we all had a different story. And what they were proposing was lunacy. They wanted to dump the most complex type 1 diabetics onto GPs. Yeah? We don't have the skills or the caseload to maintain a good service. So it's a massive dumbing down of provision. So I wrote an email to the consultants. I said, look, I heard you're in favour of this. They said, no, we've had minimal discussion and we're all against it. Then I went to the patient group leader. I said, I hear you're in favour of this. We've had no discussion. We weren't involved. So they tell each group separately packs of lies. So I rang up the newly appointed stooge, and I said, do you really want to be the diabetes lead? Yeah, I think I'll do it. She happened to be in the same practice as Howard Stoke. I said, what do you know about diabetes? Have you got any postgraduate qualifications in it? What do you know about it? Are you an expert in it? She said, no, I'm not really. I said, fine, you step aside, I'll do it. So I did it. I nudged her out of the way, and I got the old guy back again. I said, we'll do it as a joint thing. You know what you're doing. I'm going to keep an eye on their dirty tricks. Yeah? And then when I was on board, they tried to work me over. Good cop, bad cop. I went into the CCG and they treated me like royalty, making me tea. Oh, we've heard such good things about you. Your patients love you. I thought, hang on, these people aren't so bad. You're all right, you're nice people. Then I had a conversation in the corridor with the senior manager, interim, saying, you better not rock the boat. Right? So then there was a reality check. And then when it came to the bidding of the contract, designing the contract, they said to me I wasn't allowed to speak to the consultants because they might be putting in a tender. I wasn't allowed to speak to fellow GPs because they might be getting to put in a tender. So I said, how do I come to any rationale? They said, oh well, you know, just use your experience. What do you think the problems are? I say, the problems are lack of staff. They said, that's not the sort of problem we want to hear about. What are the other problems? I said, what do you mean? They said, do you have any cases where the system's gone wrong? I said, well, not if there was staffing, it's just delays in treatment. They said, can you make some cases up?
Oh my goodness.
Can you make some cases up so we can go around to the GPs to tell them this is why we need to change? Can you make a case for change? right? That was one shock, and then the next shock was, they said, right, we're ready to tender this out, we're going to put it out to the bids, and here are the criteria. I said, well, what if any of the bidders do not make the criteria, minimum criteria? I said, we drop the criteria. So if you assume any of these bodies are functioning to hold up some high ethical level, or high performance level, or high standard of care, you are living in cloud cuckoo land. What it's all about is putting on a show and burying the bodies. Yeah? Cover up, cover up, cover up and conceal. And if anybody is stupid enough to raise a concern, most people raise it twice and see themselves have done their duty. If you keep pushing, you're going to find yourself having some disciplinary against you, or being driven out. Yeah? Or some false allegation made against you. And then you've got total corporate silence, because when they've made an example of one person, it sends a chilling effect around the institution. I know I drifted off there, sorry.
I mean, I just want to pick up on that last sentence, buried bodies, because one of the most moving parts of your documentary was the Deloitte contract of £37 billion to Deloitte and another, I forget the other, circa. And it seems to me that this government does not want the inquiry into COVID. It's pushing it into the long grass. Other European countries and Latin American countries are already reporting back on their COVID year. I think a really important campaign is around the COVID issues, because we will see the dirty contracts that were signed, all the dealing that's been hinted at, and I think that's a crucial thing for left opposition. Starmer at the dispatch box says that he wants that. We need to be pushing the Labour Party for them to be pushing this government to deliver that inquiry, or if not, we're going to be hearing about it. There's so many inquiries like Hillsborough, etc. We're going to be hearing about that in 2035.
Yeah.
And I think it's critical we come back. 1,500 dead NHS employees who are doing their jobs on the front line, and obviously we know many of the BME population in that group is high. Also, obviously, we had the PPE crisis with all those dirty contracts for PPE gear that was absolutely useless. So I just put that out there.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good idea. The thing with inquiry is nobody ever goes to jail, and they take forever, the point you made. We have we need to seek a legal change for corporate manslaughter for politicians. At the moment, they have Crown indemnity. That means if you're a Minister of State and you lead to mass preventable death, nobody can touch you, right? So we seem to have accountability at other levels. If a GP puts a foot wrong, he's up in front of the GMC, nurses, NMC. So a politician can wreak destruction, get off scot-free. Look at Matt Hancock. Does he look like a worried man? He knows he's in the clear. You know, discharge criminal investigation, there isn't one because he's protected by law. But let's not leave on a depressing note. Can you give a positive note to sum up?
Yeah, absolutely. The positive note, so we will be having a picket line on Monday, and then we will continue, the RCM will do another ballot for the next 6 months, next 6 months. And the most positive is tomorrow, we've got our rally with the trade councils, and we've got Jeremy Corbyn. So we're meeting at 11 at the pier, and the feeling is going to be amazing, so much optimism, because when we had the NEU rally, it was palpable, the sense of optimism, because there's nothing more heartening than seeing people all together, wanting for the greater good. So yeah, hopefully see you at tomorrow, 11 o'clock at the pier, going to the Observer Building at 12 o'clock with Jeremy Corbyn. So that's something positive in the immediate future.
I'm not sure how to carry on from that. I was going to ask, is anybody here who's kind of not in the know, who's not involved in the campaign, and who's just come because they've heard of the event and like to know more? Is there like regular members of the public that are here? Hey!
I do other stuff online, obviously lowdown on campaign group as well about supporting the NHS and some of the other NHS campaigns that have been run online. I mean, I was reading today about how there's all these training, and they're not being given further training or chances of jobs within the NHS. When we actually need 1,400 consultants and anaesthetists at the moment.
Sounds like you're in the know.
Yeah, yeah, it was very, very shocking seeing this. I mean, one of the things I read years and years ago was Lionel Shriven's book called So Much for That. And even though it's a novel and a fiction, it's about the health service in America, or lack of. And that was very, very shocking, similarly to the things that were even more illuminating in this film. What I'd like to know though is how we can get this film put out. I mean, it really should be in public domain everywhere.
Well, it's on YouTube, it's in the public domain, so look up the link. There's a website with the film, there's a lot of resources on there explaining primary care networks, integrated care, there's lots of stuff on there, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. We between us, because our media isn't doing their job, the media should be holding power to account. Our media are in bed with power. So we have a merger of the state and corporations, which Mussolini defined as fascism. So we've got a big part on our hands. But my function here today is to hopefully motivate enough of you to equip yourself with an understanding. Don't get into the details, don't get into the weeds. You need broad brush to be able to convince others and engage where you can, social media, radio, whatever you can do. But don't overcomplicate things, keep it simple. It's in everybody's interest, rich or poor, to have universal health care which is safe. Because, you know, this is going to not only be very much more expensive, it's going to have an economic hit. There's 500,000 people of working age languishing on waiting lists. Well, you know, they could be productive, and there are carers who are languishing on waiting lists, no longer being able to care for younger relatives or older relatives. So the economic knock-on effect of destroying the health service is a level of economic suicide and vandalism that is hard to imagine coming on the back of Brexit. You know what I mean? Shooting ourselves in both feet with both barrels. That's what's going on at the moment.
I got train back to Eastbourne. I'll be on the picket line on Monday. In Eastbourne. Assuming there'll be one there.
Eastbourne and Conquest, absolutely.
I'll be at Eastbourne. Excuse me, I'm going with a train. Thank you very, very much.
The only reason I ask that question is because ideally we want at least half the audience, maybe more, people who haven't heard this before.
Yeah.
So if you can host any screenings and get the general public along, and ideally NA media or NHS staff as well, because often they don't know as much as you think they do. That would be a great thing. So,
How many viewings have you shown to the NHS staff?
NHS staff are very hard to get to because they're broken.
Yeah.
The last thing they want to hear is how bad they're living it. You know, it's a bit of a Stockholm syndrome, right? Their own self-esteem is very crushed. They feel powerless, and constantly there's this battle: do I stay or do I leave? Am I better off working in Tesco's than being exposed to all this trauma and degradation on the ward? So when I speak to other health professionals, 9 times out of 10 they run in the other direction. They really don't want to know, and some are so frightened that when we do public stalls, they don't want to be even seen discussing the NHS in public. So there is a culture of leave me alone, I've got too much on my mind, and fear. That combination is hard to break. That's why we need leaders to give everybody else a spine to fight.
I sent an email to Laura Dodsworth, who wrote the book. After seeing your film, read the book A State of Fear, which is all about COVID. She's a psychologist and a journalist, and she wrote that book in 2020, and it's extremely interesting, all about COVID and the propaganda and etc. of the government and the NHS. But how do we, as I said to Colin, you can bring the horses to water, you can drag them to water, but you can't get them to drink it because, since seeing this film, and I've been spreading the word and telling everybody and really being annoying to friends and family, but the fact is, they seem to, people just want to turn a blind eye and they don't want to know because the mental health has gone, bad mental health has gone through the roof since COVID. People have been living in fear during COVID. And now, to be looking at the NHS and being told by me that, it's being privatised, You know, you don't want to go to hospital in the NHS because you're not going to be seen, you're not going to have an operation. It's
I think we need to organise a day trip to France
Yeah.
and try and learn what's the difference between our mentality and the French mentality.
But I think
And import it and use it, because I agree with you, there is a problem, but we're all psychologically battered down.
And that's deliberately the government
Yeah.
designing, so we're struggling, you know, like nurses struggling to bloody, you know, pay the bills and all that, and they're frightened as well, but, you know, and traumatised. Don't forget that, you know, all healthcare workers are recovering from the collective trauma of COVID, where an unknown pathogen, we had nothing to throw at it, you know, nobody can question our integrity, and yet, you know, the way the government has behaved, it's really difficult, but I agree. You know, when I do my media things, people go, oh, have you spoken to the trust? Have you said, I'm like, I'm just going to do it anyway, because nurses are fearful of losing their registration, fearful of their PIN, and they are really terrified of speaking out, but all of us, we are all just got the nose to grindstone, we can't look up because we're all just struggling, and that's a deliberate ploy by the government, isn't it? Exactly.
one more question, but the answer to your point, I would sort of say, if people find it hard to listen, just plant 1 or 2 seeds, just 1 or 2 facts that they can't dispute, let them go away and fester on it, and then it will grow. People don't change their mind immediately. Sometimes it takes a long time. But as long as you
And phone up LBC, as Bob suggested, because constantly, and it's a right-wing audience, I've been on Talk TV, and then I'm on Talk TV, and then I get trolls from Twitter. A lot of them are obviously bots, but it's terrible. I went and spoke up about the nursing pay, and then within about 2 minutes, I got a Facebook message from someone saying, oh, if you don't like it, get a new job, it's all about immigration. That was within 2 minutes. Went on Twitter, pink head, commie nurse, all nurses do is do TikTok dances, well, you know, all of this immediately. So, you know, we are constantly fighting the narrative, but that's where we need to talk. We need to get on the Talk TV, because even if it's about me saying, rather than, you know, patient safety, emphasising patient safety, we're having key messages, because every day people are hearing the radio, they're looking at the papers constantly. So even like, you said, one message, you know, put it on your Facebook, put it on Instagram, it's constantly fighting that narrative, you know, all the time, every opportunity, in whichever way you can.
You have the final question.
Yeah, actually, half of what I was going to say you just said,
Oh, okay.
to give people little bits of information. But the other thing I was going to say to everybody, please, little bits of information in unexpected places. I said several times lately, I do most of my politics in the post office queue. Just make your comments more useful than what a nice day. It's amazing what you can get rolling in places like that.
Right, thank you all for listening and coming.